This week on To the Contrary.
First, Hollywood's Nate Parker responds to the furor over an alleged rape. Then, can To the Contrary's longtime panelist Kellyanne Conway help Donald Trump with women voters? And France and the Burkini, cultural norms versus religious freedoms.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the allegations against Nate Parker.
Actor, writer, and director Nate Parker is in the middle of a media frenzy over an alleged rape of which he was acquitted while he was in college at Penn State University 17 years ago. This, as his film, The Birth of a Nation, was bought for a record $17.5 million for commercial distribution this October. The film was lauded last winter at the Sundance Film Festival. Parker was accused in 1999 of raping a fellow student. The victim, whose name was never made public, said Parker and his roommate, Jean Celestin, raped her while she was intoxicated and unconscious. The accuser also said they later harassed, intimidated, and stalked her after she pressed charges. Both men said the sex was consensual, but Parker was cleared, while Celestin was convicted and appealed. Celestin receives a credit in the film. The woman committed suicide in 2012. Her family said in a statement to the New York Times, the rape overcame her.
So, Sam Bennett, what impact should these revelations have about Nate Parker's past on his credibility as a spokesperson, even advocate for social justice issues?
And let's just take one word you just said and change it a little bit, not should but will, and think no further than Bill Cosby and Woody Allen, what their misbehaviors in their private lives did to their public legacies.
I think it has a significant impact on his credibility. This is someone who's produced a critically acclaimed movie that could have gotten him a lot of exposure on important issues in social justice, but he has lost a lot of credibility with these revelations that have come out.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking that it definitely has damaged his credibility, especially when the major plot device in the film is the rape of Nat Turner's wife. And how do you have a conversation about that? Specifically, that was a gang rape. And how do you have a conversation about that when you have yourself been accused of essentially the same thing?
I mean, I'm going to have to take a tack that's going to upset everybody, but I mean, he was accused, he was acquitted, and I know that the justice system has historically failed rape victims, but again, he was acquitted. The other person was, it was overturned on appeal, although I think
it wasn't overturned on appeal. He appealed it, and there are different stories about whether it was. There are different reports,
right?
And the only reason she didn't go back was because she had had enough and didn't want to prosecute him once again. However, having said that, Nate Parker, was acquitted 17 years ago. There's been a lot of advancement in terms of public view of a man saying, oh, she was drunk and she consented. Would a jury have reacted the same way?
Well, I would be different now, but again, this is that kind of holding somebody to today's standards for something that happened a long time ago, and whether that happens, and I mean, maybe he rightly deserves it, but again, this is kind of
Don't you think the public is a lot more suspicious now?
Oh,
of some guy who says she was drunk and she said yes.
Well, I think the thing that's very frustrating for me about it is that, yes, in the court of law, he was tried and acquitted, which is amazing for 1999 as an African-American man in a sort of case, especially I found out that the survivor, the victim, was white. But what I find also is interesting is that he's
So you're saying she was white? Because I didn't know if she was white or black.
she actually was white. What I find interesting is sort of the behavior around it. That she was taking Prozac because she was already prone to depression. They had drinking. She passed out. They had a pre-existing sexual relationship, which was apparently used as evidence as to why he would think it would be fine to have a sexual relationship. Mm-hmm. The guy, his friend, was let off because he had waved him in the room. There was a third guy who was waved in the room by Parker, but he said, I don't feel like this is right, and he actually left. And then the fact that she had filed this case when she had also been intimidated by his friends and other classmates on the wrestling team. So I think really the question is not so much that he was acquitted, although some people contest that and why he was acquitted, but the fact, a lot of the behavior around it that plays a lot into this rape culture we're talking about.
Yeah, but
today.
okay, since you know so much more about it than has been in the media, tell me. She says that she was persecuted, that somebody came in her room and went through her files and left it in disarray.
Yeah.
Are you saying that was not Nate Parker?
I don't know if it was Nate Parker. That part.
I mean, what do you know about who it may have been? After she filed the claim.
My understanding was that when she filed the claim, it was not just him specifically, but other folks who were friends of his who, called her names, followed her, intimidated her. Because so it easily could have been a friend who was just like, maybe she's hiding something. I'm going to go look through all of that stuff. But it kind of plays into that larger rape culture conversation that we're having now, and I think that's why it's coming up in the way it is.
And where did you learn this?
Pretty much reading extensively, especially once I heard it break. I had a couple of friends who work in sexual assault advocacy started talking about it. I started looking through old case files. There's actually a transcript of their phone conversation and his tone with her. That was what a lot of people were upset about, is that when he talked to her specifically, he said, she pretended like she was pregnant, and she said, how many men were in the room? I have no memory of this. And he says, you put yourself in this, this situation. I don't want to be mean. And it was sort of putting the blame on her. And so I think that when he put his response out on Facebook, the response was so not positive, because that transcript had come out. A lot of the court documents, which are now public, have come out about what happened then.
And if I could, Bonnie, I think we are talking a lot about the legal specifics of this. Fine. But in truth, the issue is this. Here is a talented young man who's put forth a film, an African-American young man. How often do African-American directors get this kind of attention, let alone the top earning film in a Sundance Film Purchase Agreement, right? So here we have a history-making situation with a pivotal scene from that movie, a gang rape. And here's the director and writer himself not coming forward proactively and saying, I know something about this. I myself was in a situation like that. That's what this young man should have done. It's what he failed to do. And it's not about the legalities of whether he did it or didn't do it, in my mind. It's about how it's perceived and its impact.
I completely agree. I think there's been some issues about whether or not Fox Searchlight and some of these other groups are going to have him do the tour to go out publicly and talk about it. And it
there's hesitation about sending him to churches and to college campuses to talk about it.
It sounds like that's where they're worried about it. But in the pivot, what's interesting to me is that I feel exactly the same way. The Facebook post that he wrote was supposed to sort of neutralize this, at least to some extent, which is, this happened, this was in my past, I'm discussing
he did
it publicly.
A huge mea culpa.
I thought it was incredibly disrespectful the way he wrote it, in the sense that it was like $5.
Really, I didn't.
Maybe that's too strong of a word. I just felt.
I felt him.
It wasn't the right tone. He tried to have it both ways. That it was unambiguously consensual what happened with me, but then he goes on to say, but nobody should put themselves in that position. So he was kind of trying to say nothing happened.
Well, it felt like he overcame something, which is being it wasn't he wasn't the victim, and so I feel like if we're going to talk about it, I think.
But he also, in fairness to him, he did say, "Look, I wasn't sensitive enough. Now I have 5 daughters. Of course, 2 of them out of wedlock. Wonderful.
Well,
but
that's a step in the right direction. But I guess to Sam's point, I think shouldn't he be talking about these issues? He has an opportunity as a platform. He has an opportunity to talk about something that happened in his past, talk about the importance of him worrying about his own daughters going to college and having a similar experience. But this was an opportunity for him with a microphone in front of him, and I think he hasn't taken it. I think it's just let's just not talk about it anymore and move on to the movie.
And that's that rape culture. Let's shove it under. Let's not talk about it. And he had an obligation. He had an opportunity before it all came out to say, listen, I've been here. I've lived it. I've made my own mistakes that I regret, and that's what this film is talking about. And he not only did he totally miss that moment, he's made it worse since.
Well, should Fox Searchlight pull out completely?
I don't think that's the case, because I think at the end of the day, I think this does cast a very long shadow over the film. I think, unfortunately, I think this is a great opportunity for an African-American director and lead actor to have an opportunity to potentially win an Oscar, especially in the environment that has been in the Oscars and the Academy for the past several years. And now that's being overshadowed by this. So I think that's the unfortunate part of this. Is obviously it's a very fantastic film, but we're going to be talking about this when that film comes out. We're going to talk about it at the Oscars.
It was the film, and it came out, and it got some media critics say so many laudatory awards, etc. Right as the Oscars, as the Oscars were highly criticized
for lack
for no directorial or actor awards to African Americans after the past couple of years of films like 12 Years a Slave and Selma.
Young woman, Selma.
Well, and I think the unfortunate part about it is, like, yeah, it's going to cast a long shadow. Some people are suspicious that it's come up now because it isn't such Oscar contention. There's an Oscar campaign, and some studio at what didn't get the film probably is leading this. I certainly know that the family has been like, we don't know why. We are appreciative that it's coming up now or having a dialogue about it in a larger framework, but we are suspicious as to, you know, the motives behind it, and we don't want to stoke these coals any further.
To their credit. Let us know what
credit.
you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Hervé or at To the Contrary. From sexual assault to gender and politics.
Donald Trump's abrupt campaign turnaround attempt this week sets up the GOP nominee with new advisors who will reportedly let him be himself. The candidate promoted longtime To the Contrary panelist, pollster, and GOP strategist Kellyanne Conway to campaign manager, the first time a woman has held that title working for a Republican presidential nominee. She is one of the top 2 pollsters in the U.S. on understanding and attracting female voters. Donald Trump is losing with all categories of female voters, older, younger, white, of color, a first for a Republican since 1980. A Quinnipiac poll of likely Virginia voters late this week shows Clinton leading among women by 25 points. Virginia is a swing state. 60% of female Virginia voters have a strongly unfavorable view of Trump. Clinton also has a huge lead among college-educated whites. The Trump team also has a new CEO, Breitbart News chairman Steve Bannon, known as a street fighter. Ousted Fox News chief Roger Ailes is said to be helping Trump prepare for the upcoming presidential debates.
Okay, and Jen Higgins, the first thing Friday he does after Kellyanne comes on this week is saying that maybe he chooses his words incorrectly. Very vague, doesn't talk about which words, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But is that the effect of a woman as the number 2 person on the campaign?
I definitely think that Kellyanne Conway is having an effect on this campaign, but what I think is even more interesting is that this is what the 3rd campaign manager that Donald Trump's had. How many more times we're going to see this change up? I think the reason we're seeing this change up right now is honestly because Donald Trump is down by double digits against Hillary Clinton, and so anything that Donald Trump hates more than losing, it's like, or being right is a losing, and so he's losing right now, and I think he's compensating for that by bringing Kellyanne on.
Okay, but, you know, you say 3rd set. By the way, all this week, up until Friday when Manafort finally, the media finally reported he said, yes, he was leaving. All this week, there were no this wasn't upending the campaign. There were no changes. There was nothing wrong with the campaign. They were just adding some people. If they keep that kind of attitude and they lie so patently, and at this point in the game, can they change any minds? Can they change women's minds? I mean, it's not the typical campaign where nobody's paying attention till Labor Day. People have been watching this campaign.
People are watching, and I think what you're seeing with a new campaign shift, whether it's new or whether it's revived or whether it's new blood and new life in the campaign, I think a lot of this has been rote. It's been over and over again. Like I say, this is the 3rd time we've tried to have not a reboot, but additional life brought into this campaign. And I think what you're seeing from Kellyanne, at least, is an interest in trying to build some policy behind that. I think the speech that he gave recently in Charlotte regarding being that person, that candidate for forgotten Americans, this is all tone and rhetoric that Kellyanne has created to allow him to sort of not just talk about being the next president and using a lot of those broad brush words, but also having an opportunity to build up before this next presidential debate by talking about how he wants to make America great again.
And if I could just intercede, you know, my big soapbox is we need more women in politics, period. I'm overjoyed to see her there because not only do we not have enough women in front, right? We're ranked 84th in the world, the number of women in elected office, but we don't have enough women behind. So it's wonderful, no matter what the outcome of this race, to have a woman campaign chair on the Republican Party
Well, you say
side.
you say no matter what the outcome is. You know, frequently they say about women CEOs of corporations, like Marissa Mayer at Yahoo, they're only brought in when the foundation is about to tank anyway. Yeah. So this is a suicide reward for a woman?
No. It's just that, for example, clearly I'm a massive Hillary Clinton person, have been so for forever, right? But this chronic paucity, right, this chronic lack of women running for office, serving in office, and serving behind counseling is a massive issue. So I'm thrilled to see her there. I think it's poorly timed for her because she's going to end up being the fall person if things don't go. That's unfortunate, but again, it's a strong move in the right direction.
Or fired sooner.
Well, yeah, I wonder how long she could possibly last with Bannon coming on board. Bannon's whole thing of more Trump.
Yeah.
And so here's Kellyanne trying to change the tone, and she's going to have some effectiveness at that in, you know, this first week and maybe on into next week. And then after that, I think Bannon's going to steamroll everything and say, no, we want Trump to be Trump. That worked for him in the primary, and it's not working for him now.
But don't you think Bannon, who's smart enough to have a MBA from, I think it's Harvard, and who was at Goldman Sachs and made multi-millions while he was there, isn't he going to see that there might be a difference between the kind of voter you appeal to in the primaries and the general election?
I would like to believe that, but when you see what's being written on Breitbart, I'm not sure he cares.
I would agree with that.
What is being written? What is being written?
Oh, it is all just, you know, Trump. Pro-Trump this, pro-Trump that. Everything is spun in favor of Trump, even things that contradict things he's said before, even things that aren't, they're supposed to be so conservative, even things that Trump says that are not right-leaning at all are defended as just being matter of fact. Like, everything is defended.
Atima, you were a Virginia delegate to the Democratic Convention.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Okay, she's way ahead in Virginia, but she's only 5 or 6 points ahead nationally, even with this candidate who is, you know, shall we say, hardly a credible candidate.
Right.
Why?
Well, I think it's a couple things. I think one, like, there is always like polling being interesting, because I think what it comes down to an election is really where she's winning in the states, and she's doing well in the battleground states. She's doing well in Virginia, Colorado,
Pennsylvania,
Ohio. And so, as long as there was like a smartness to picking Kane, besides the fact that he's just a great guy and has had has like some serious street cred to bring to the table, that also, like, you could lose some of those battleground states, still win Virginia, and have a path to the White House. And so she's thought very strategically about that. And this country is in a lot more of a hostile election than it has been in years past. To Kellyanne Conway coming on board, I mean, she's done What Women Really Want book with Celinda Lake, and she really demonstrates the knowledge.
She's the most well-known, respected Republican pollster when it comes to women's issues, bar none.
But it could be either a really career move to actually be the campaign manager for Trump and turn him around from, this guy who said everything from, like, I let my wives take care of taking care of children, to, saying to one of his contestants on Apprentice, that would be a nice image to see you on your knees, into, like, this great guy that can appeal to suburban women, which for her, if you're a Republican manager, I would be looking at suburban married women and getting them to, like, loosen their.
My response to that would be, I think that's fair, but I think Trump's losing in all the demographics that even Mitt Romney did okay in. So that's not a great sign.
White males.
Except for white males who are not college educated. Non-college educated. That's his demographic.
As he put, I love less educated people.
That's his demographic. But I think what you're going to see, too, is that in addition to talking about whether this race gets nastier and whether it gets harder, I think it absolutely does, whether Kellyanne Conway and Bannon are involved, because at the end of the day, their priority is going to be talking about not getting those women voters. Like, that would be common sense. It's going to be about attacking Hillary Clinton at every possible angle, and you're going to see that in the next several months.
Your last words. Any chance of getting more Republican women support?
I'm not sure what can be turned around, what Kellyanne can do. I mean, it would be wonderful if she could turn something around, and then that's going to be great for her, but I just don't think Trump's that kind of person. So,
All right, but we always expect to see things tighten closer to the race. Remember that. From campaigns to clothing.
French Prime Minister Manuel Valls this week said the so-called burkini, which covers Muslim women so they can swim without revealing their bodies at public beaches, reflects a worldview based on, quote, the enslavement of women. He supports 5 French Mediterranean towns that have banned the burkinis, saying they're not compatible with the values of France. The burkini was invented by an Australian designer about a decade ago. That to encourage Muslim women in Western countries to go to the beach. But concerns about the compatibility of the burkini and Western culture implicate aspects of the debate over Islamic immigration in the U.S. presidential campaign, such as if Western countries try to control cultural or religious habits of immigrant groups, are they automatically racist or discriminatory?
So, Ashe, France says this is a security concern. Do you see a security concern here, or is it really about changing Islamic culture when there are large groups of Islamic immigrants to a Western country with a very different culture?
Right. I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think France is kind of worried right now. They've had multiple terrorist attacks, so they're kind of seeing what can we do. I don't think the burkini is really the fight to be having, quite honestly. That I don't think that's going to solve terrorism. But I mean, I kind of am interested in how 10 years ago, I remember when it was reported they came out with this burkini, and now Muslim women can go to the beach, and everyone's like, this is great. And now 10 years later, we're like, oh, it's a sign of oppression and it's terrible. Like, I love when issues like change like that. Not the way it changed, but that it just fascinates me how culture changed so much in the past 10 years. I think these bans, I mean, why are you banning anything, honestly? And if you're going to ban this for these women, then they can't go to the beach. And that's kind of leaving them in the house.
Why are you banning anything? You don't think any bans are appropriate? You don't think any limits are appropriate, given the kinds of problems that Belgium and France have had?
Well, I'm not sure burkini is the ban to do. Like, I mean, maybe I'm talking
but
about
isn't it a pardon the pun toe in the water of how far can we go with solving this problem, which is we have this community that is here that is not integrating into society, and we want immigrants who come here to integrate into society, to assimilate.
Well, we do, and I think that America...
And I don't mean just France, obviously. We're having a similar problem here in the U.S.
Right, and I mean, for me, both my parents are immigrants. My parents are fairly assimilated in a lot of things. I'm pretty much American as you can get in being raised that way. I think a lot of immigrant families are very similar, but I think when it comes to sort of questioning how culture and religion are handled, especially when it's not doing any particular damage to something like wearing a burkini, it only serves to further anger that community about feeling targeted. So they can use that. I would, if I was an ISIS leader, I would use that in a video to be like, see how much they don't like us. They're actually targeting our women to wear something different. See how much they don't appreciate or understand our culture.
But, you know, but if you take this, I'm going to take this argument and broaden it out maybe to the point of ridiculousness. But on the one hand, first of all, if, as everybody assumes, Donald Trump loses, all his supporters is 13.3 million cracks in the glass ceiling, if you might. If you would, 13.3 million supporters in the Republican primary. I mean, do we ignore their concerns about immigration, or do we try to incorporate some of those concerns as we try to unite the country again?
I don't know. I think when I hear them talking about French values and Belgian values, and I think about American values, I'm like, is it our values to not allow people, should we choose not to allow people to pursue the American dream, if that's going swimming or whatever it is? I think we're putting...
Why are we not upset then? Let's put that same on Islamic countries. If you go to any Middle Eastern country other than Israel and you have an Israeli passport stamp in your passport, you can't get in. How controlling is that?
But is that a value question? Or is that...
Yeah, it's a religious value question. Of course it is. Why isn't anybody upset about that?
No, that's a very fair point. I think in the standpoint of the burkini, I think I hear people talking about using excuses. I think if we're going to talk about not wanting Muslims in a country, that's what this is. It's a backdoor to saying that, because we're talking about, oh, well, there are young kids at the beach that are scared and they don't like seeing women in burkinis, or it's a hygiene issue. What does that mean? You know what I mean?
They're essentially the same as the bodysuit that the Olympian women wear.
Well, I know, but I start thinking about that through the lens of like civil rights in the Jim Crow era, and how integrating pools was a lot harder than integrating schools in some cases, because people didn't like the ideas of blacks and whites being in the same public swimming pool. So you start thinking about these things, and it's like, I don't know, where does it start and where does it end? I think it's a very valid point, but the underlying tone here is that, oh, it's sexist to say women can't wear what they want to wear, and then we add a layer of like religion on top of it.
But I'm saying, and I know most Americans would say we are much better, quite frankly, than Islamic countries, many of which have dictatorships, none of which are democracies. Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. But why do we let them get away with being so controlling about, you know, I mean, again, if you're Israeli or if you have an Israeli stamp in your passport, Jewish, obviously aimed at Jews, you can't get into their countries. And yet we try to stop, or Western culture tries to stop one Islamic way of dress, and You're the worst.
but,
you're not politically correct.
But Bonnie, I think we have a situation where the United States, by all measures, is the most successful of any nation in the world in assimilating immigrants. We are rock stars at that, and that is the bedrock of our economy. We make it part of the sort of signature of our nation, this assimilation of immigrants. The Islamic countries don't do that. So they can't be measured by that difference. I will say this. I think that we were founded on the foundation of religious freedom. I think we have to hew to that, or else we get ourselves into muddy waters.
And you don't think we're opening up a big pit here if we don't deal with the problem here in some way?
Well, I think we are, but to your earlier point about how the other Middle Eastern countries are allowed to treat women in this way, the U.S. does nothing. I don't know what the U.S. really can do, but I mean, I do feel like the U.S. should be taking more of a stop to, spread women's equality around the country.
All right, that's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. I do think that there's got to be some concession.
I agree with 1,000%. We